welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Basketball Weekly Planner. I'm Amber Wilson, and joining me, of course, is senior fantasy writer Jamey Eisenberg. And Jamey, the trade deadline came and went today.
Thank goodness.
What an intense 24-hour period. It got even more intense as the deadline approached. But before we talk about that, let's talk about two guys involved in trades that made their debut out west last night.
That's right. Jason Kidd and Shaquille O'Neal both finally made their debuts with their respective teams. Jason Kidd goes to the Mavericks, expected to do a lot of good things for that offense, which, as we talked about previously, I think he will. I think he's going to eventually get Dirk Nowitzki to be a much higher scorer, which was very evident in their first game against New Orleans. He had a very good game. Josh Howard will benefit as well. I think Jason Terry also should do well out there. Jason Kidd, very disappointing in terms of his performance. He was outplayed by Chris Paul, but it's only the beginning for him. And then when you look at Shaquille O'Neal, I think he played 29 minutes against the Lakers, which was a big rival game for him, facing his former team, facing Kobe Bryant. Very much anticipated, much hyped game. Lived up to the billing if anybody got a chance to see it because it was incredible. But I think you'll see Shaquille O'Neal really start to get his feet underneath him. He's going to start to play around what he did last night, Thursday night with 29 minutes. That should be what to expect from him. And he'll get around a double-double. He'll be about a 15-point guy, 10 rebounds. The biggest benefit, though, is to Amari Stoudemire because Amari Stoudemire is going to get one-on-one coverage, one-on-one rebounding, where he had a huge game against the Lakers, and I think that's only going to continue for a guy like Stoudemire. So you'll see some of the other guys around these players really start to take hold, and that'll help their fantasy value going forward. Okay,
so maybe good things to come from a couple guys involved in a big trade, but not the only big trade.
Nope.
I mean, this has been the craziest trade deadline in recent memory,
Very
I think.
true.
So let's go ahead and get into what has happened in the past 24 hours.
Yeah, we have another team out west looking to stay in contention is the San Antonio Spurs. They make a very minor deal, but could have big implications come playoff time. But for fantasy owners, Kurt Thomas going from Seattle to San Antonio, the only thing that it might do, it may hurt the value a little bit of Tim Duncan because Thomas may take a few rebounds away. He's a little bit better rebounder than a guy like Francisco Elson and even Oberto, who's still on the roster. So I think you'll see that deal really not impact fantasy owners too much. But there was another deal also involving New Orleans and Houston. Bonzi Wells goes from the Rockets to New Orleans, where he will probably take a lot of minutes away from Morris Peterson. If you have an opportunity to pick up Bonzi Wells, that's something you might want to consider. When you're looking at what Houston got, they get Bobby Jackson in return. Bobby Jackson's going to replace Mike James as the backup point guard. Not really going to affect Ray Alston too much. Jackson's fantasy value going to still be very minimal.
Okay, but that wasn't it. There was
that was not it, no.
That was definitely not it. There was also another big-time trade at the last minute, really at the last second, or after the last second when it actually came down. And it was a huge trade involving three teams, Cleveland, Chicago, and Seattle. Tell us about this one, Jamey.
Well, Cleveland was, trying to be a player in this and make sure that they could still be a contender, not only in the East, which they already are, but a contender for the NBA title. They're the biggest winner in this three-team trade where they get Wally Szczerbiak, they get Ben Wallace, they get Joe Smith, and Delonte West. Ben Wallace is probably not going to have too much of an increase in terms of fantasy value. He's still going to be a rebounding threat, not going to score much. So I don't think his value is hurt at all. I think maybe you'll see Zydrunas Ilgauskas lose some rebounds just because of Ben Wallace on the roster, and especially once Anderson Varejao returns from his ankle injury. Joe Smith, who's been a very good fantasy producer recently with the Bulls, he's going to lose a lot of value because he's not going to see as many touches. He's not going to be as much of a factor because, again, Zydrunas Ilgauskas will command the paint, again, with Ben Wallace there and Varejao. So Joe Smith is probably worth dropping at this point. When you look at Wally Szczerbiak, he's going to replace Larry Hughes, who was one of the guys sent to Chicago. I think Wally Szczerbiak, he'll probably still have one of those good nights, one bad night. He'll be a scorer. He'll play off LeBron and do very well. And Delonte West now becomes part of a crowded backcourt with Damon Jones and Boobie Gibson and some of the players that they have there in Cleveland. So I don't think Delonte West changed very much. When you look at what Seattle got, they got a bunch of expiring contracts. Not even worth mentioning because none of those guys are going to have much fantasy value. Although Earl Watson and even now Luke Ridnour, they may get a little bit of a bump just because Delonte West is no longer there and Wally Szczerbiak is gone as well. So look at some of these guys coming off the bench for Seattle to maybe have a little bit of an increase. Larry Hughes going to Chicago, I think that really hurts his value. He's a guy that started to play well recently, but now he's going to a very crowded backcourt with Ben Gordon, Kirk Heinrich, and Chris Duhon. So now, Hughes really doesn't do much. And then Drew Gooden, probably going to replace Ben Wallace. His fantasy value probably stays the same. So a lot in terms of fantasy, these guys probably don't really change very much. We'll see how it develops. But Cleveland now going to be a very big factor in the Eastern playoffs and certainly in the NBA championship race.
All right, say it all backwards now. I want that whole list again. My goodness.
I wish I could.
All right, let's go ahead and get into your starts and sits before we continue on.
Sure.
Goodness. All right, we're going to start with the sit guards this week because there's a couple guys on this list, of course, involved in a trade recently, and that is the theme of today, in Devin Harris and Mike Bibby, and then you also have Cephalosha on this list as well.
That's right. Cephalosha is a guy that's probably going to lose some value with Larry Hughes coming on board, but Mike Bibby goes to Atlanta, a trade that we really haven't touched on here. I think that's going to help him eventually, but this week I'm a little concerned because Bibby's been a slow starter this season. He's been slow so far in his first couple of games with the Hawks. He does face Sacramento again. He faced them already once in Sacramento. He faces them once at home in this coming week. But I think just you want to give Bibby some time to adjust to playing with some of the scorers and some of the players there in Atlanta, where Joe Johnson commands the ball so much, as well as Josh Smith, Marvin Williams, Al Horford, some of the talented players that they have with the Hawks, these young players. And then Devin Harris still dealing with the ankle injury. He's still going to be about another week. So good increase in fantasy value for Devin Harris, but I think you still want to sit him just to make sure that he's healthy and back on the court.
All right, and speaking of Bibby, Bino Udrih benefits with Bibby gone now, and so he's a start guard for you this week, along with Peja Stojakovic and Jose Calderon.
Absolutely. Bino Udrih, tremendous game against Bibby in the first matchup. So I like the schedule that they have for this week. Udrih is facing Miami twice and the Hawks once. He had 18 and 10 versus the Hawks already. So I like just what he's going to be able to do. If he's available in your leagues, pick him up. Jose Calderon is a very interesting prospect going forward because we've seen TJ Ford come back from the injury to his neck, but now he's suffering with a wrist injury and an abdominal strain in his stomach. TJ Ford is a slow healer, as we know. Probably going to take some time to come back from these injuries. So Jose Calderon, you thought his fantasy value was going to go down, right back up again because TJ Ford is not there.
All right, and your sit forwards this week, you have Josh Boone, and Marvin Williams.
Yeah, the thing with is it's kind of interesting. One of those high rookies, drafted very highly, expected to do well, had some good spurts earlier this season. But with Charlie Villanueva now moving back into the starting lineup, I just see taking a big nosedive in terms of his fantasy value. Not a first couple games coming off the bench. And then when you look at Josh Boone and some of the bigger guys in New Jersey without Jason Kidd running the show there, not very good prospects for him going forward.
Okay, and your start forwards this week, Danny Granger, Kevin Durant, and Sean Marion, who's a guy, of course, who recently traded. How's he doing down there in Miami?
Amber, it's amazing. Sean Marion's only started in 87% of fantasy leagues on CBSSports.com, and I don't understand why, because in his 3 games since he's come to Miami, he's averaging over 20 points, 10 rebounds. Great schedule this week where I believe they face Sacramento twice, a team that doesn't play very much defense, and Seattle once as well, where they don't really defend at all. So I think Sean Marion's in line for some bigger games, going to continue to be a double-double threat and really going to thrive playing with one of our producer Aaron Weisberg's favorite players in Dwayne Wade.
All right, and taking a look at your sit centers this week, Chris Kaman, Andrus Bandras, and Eddie Curry. This is a guy that we thought the Knicks would trade. He didn't. Why, and why is he a sit, Jamie?
Well, the thing with Eddie Curry is the Knicks are just a mess. I think the Knicks would have loved to trade either Eddie Curry or Zach Randolph. They weren't able to do it. Curry has been sat in the second half of some games recently. The Knicks are fighting with Zach Randolph and Nate Robinson throwing water and towels at each other. It's just a mess in New York. It's amazing how the Knicks have some of these great individual pieces. They can't move them to help their team. So Eddie Curry just going forward, I just don't think is a very good fantasy prospect. And don't start him this week. Don't start him really much going forward for the rest of this year unless you have no other prospects.
Okay, that was pretty emphatic sounding. And your start centers this week, rather, Mark Blunt, Tyson Chandler. And you have Mehmet Okur on this list. Utah's quietly making a push out west, Jamie. Is this because of Mehmet? It
absolutely is because of Mehmet Okur and another trade that's really had a very minor trade that's had very big implications for the Western Conference is Kyle Korver going to the Jazz has opened up things for Okur to become more of a shooter. He's got 3 double-doubles in his past 5 games. And recently there was some news out of Utah that Carlos Boozer has a little bit of a sore back. So if Boozer is out, you got to expect Okur's rebounding to go up. Great schedule for the Jazz this week and great prospects for Okur going forward. I think Utah's going to be a factor in the playoffs. As we'll see, again, minor trade, wrapping it all back in with the trade deadline stuff. Kyle Korver is going to make a big impact, and I think that's going to help Okur going forward.
Good start this week. All right, Jamie. Well, thanks for all of your help.
My pleasure.
And your patience in this crazy day. Jamie's on his cell phone. Wait, are you gonna?
That's right.
Yeah.
Last week we mentioned that I was beating Amber in our fantasy league. She actually ended up coming back to beat me, so I guess I have to watch your part.
I think you do.
I think
Absolutely.
I do as well.
All right. That'll do it for us for now. Keep your mouth right here at CBSSports.com for everything you need to know in the world of sports. And if you missed anything here today, stop, refresh, and rewatch. For Jamey Eisenberg, I'm Amber Wilson. Good luck with your lineups, guys.